Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Now, today I'm joined by the amazing Drew Marvick. Drew, how you doing today, man?
I'm awesome.
Dude, it is such an honor to have you here. I've been a big fan of yours for a long time. We got to work together a little bit on another podcast, and after that, I was like, yeah, I got to make this happen for sure now. But before we talk about why you're here, I would like for the people that don't know you to get to know you a little bit. You are a director, actor, and social media content creator, most known for your directorial debut, Pool Party Massacre. What was it like to take the reins on a movie that's become such an indie darling?
Oh man. Well, thanks for calling it an indie darling. Um, I mean, at the time, I had no idea. Like, I thought I was making a movie that no one would ever see. I mean, I was making a $6,000 slasher film, shooting it in my parents' backyard with my friends.
Right.
So, I mean, I genuinely wasn't sure if anyone would see it. It was just a passion project. I mean, I hoped people would see it. I was making the best movie I could, but it was also I was making it for me. Like, I needed to make my first movie. And so it was something that I needed to check off the list. I'd been in the film industry for, I mean, at that point, 10, 12 years. So it was just something that I really wanted to do. And I knew if I didn't just like rip the band-aid off and do it, that I might never, like all these people I work with in the film industry that are now at that time were like in their 60s and had always wanted to make a movie and just never had. And so that
Right.
was kind of my motivation. So I was like, let's just make a goddamn slasher film.
Well, and what I love about this, and I've said this numerous times on this podcast, films like that are always, in my opinion, the best films to watch because you see, you're not doing this, like you said, you weren't doing this for a paycheck. You weren't doing it, on a $1 million budget that you could just play around with. You did this out of passion, love of the genre, and love of filmmaking. And those movies really do come across as the best when you go back and rewatch them or you watch them for the first time and you know the amount of passion that went into this. Um, Pool Party Massacre is a movie that came out of nowhere, and all of a sudden, everybody's talking about Pool Party Massacre, and then everybody started talking about Drew. You've been in over 30 indie horror movies so far, and no slowing down. We got OnlyFans coming up. Very, very
Yeah.
excited about that. So how did you get connected with the OnlyFans guys?
So Paul and Angie made a movie called Streets of Vengeance.
Mhm.
And it was doing festivals at the exact same time Pool Party Massacre was. Like, I guess it was early 2017. And just happened, I was at a film festival in Portland and caught their movie right before Pool Party Massacre earlier in the day and just loved it and made a note of it in my head. Like, I got to figure out who they happened. They weren't there, unfortunately, but you know, I remembered it. And when I got back home, I looked them up and just sent them a message, like as a filmmaker or an artist. And it's nice to get positive feedback. At least I enjoy it. It's easy to get negative feedback. There's tons of that out there. But so I make a point if I see something that I really like to track the person down and let them know. And so I sent them a message, just let them know that I really liked what they did and that it played really well and they appreciated that and we kind of became friends from there. So when they made their next movie slash Lorette Party, they reached out to me and I ended up with a role in that and then Murder Size after
Murder
that
Size.
and now OnlyFans. So I mean I think I'm part of their troop, I guess you could say now, or their tribe.
Which is awesome because, like I said, when you have those amount of connections, you can never go wrong with that. And what I love about this is, like you said, it's very easy to get negative feedback. But when you have somebody, not just a fan, but somebody that's doing the same thing as you, when you have that peer reach out to you and say, "Yo, what you did was dope. Like that's super. That's sick." That really does mean a lot. Whether it's a content creator, a director, a writer, when you have a peer that's reaching out to you saying, "Hey, I respect what you did. I noticed it. It was great." That can really lift someone's spirits, man.
Yeah, I mean it's great. And something you said earlier, you were talking about how you appreciate movies that are made with passion, and that was like one of the biggest compliments that I could ever get about. I mean, I guess about anything, but specifically about Pool Party Massacre, is people started saying you not knowing who I was because I mean I'm just a fan. Like I've been to conventions as a fan, and I'd been to film festivals as a fan, but as far as a filmmaker and an actor, nobody knew who I was. So people were saying things like, "Whoever made, I can tell whoever made this movie is a real horror fan." this wasn't made by somebody who's just trying to cash in or anything like
Right.
that. This is a real horror fan making a movie that because they're passionate about it. And that was the biggest compliment I could ever get, because that's 100% what it was. Like I always said, it was making a movie that 15-year-old Drew would love. Like that was my goal. As we were making it on set, people would be like, oh man, is this going to translate well, or is this going to play well, or is this what people want or studios want? And I'd be like, I don't know. I'm making this for 15-year-old Drew. Like, I
Right.
just want to know what like. That's why there's a guy masturbating in the bathroom and gets a drill through a wall into his back, because I know 15-year-old Drew would laugh his ass off at that kill. I don't know if it'll get me kicked off of Amazon. I don't care. Just want 15-year-old Drew to be happy.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, back then, 33-year-old Ken laughed at it too. So it wasn't
People,
it
yeah,
wasn't just 15-year-old Drew laughing; it was me too. So for people that haven't seen Pool Party Massacre, where can they check that out at?
um, well, it's a great question. I don't even know all of the places that it is anymore. I've lost track, but I mean the most common and easily accessible. It's on iTunes. It's on Prime. It's on Tubi, and I'm sure it's on 40 other things that I actually don't even know anymore, because I have no interest in watching that movie ever again. So I lose track.
Right.
But it's very easy to find. I mean, if you just Google Pool Party Massacre, you'll find lots of ways to watch it. But definitely, it's on Prime and Tubi. So I mean, Tubi for free, and
Right.
Prime, if you have Prime, then it's free.
Well, and the
So
good thing is, you guys don't even have to Google it, because honestly, I did it for you. All the links are down in the description, so you guys can check it out if you haven't already. I've also got Drew's social media links, so you can follow along with him, so you can stay up to date on every project he has coming up for us in the future. Like I said, he still has OnlyFans coming up, and we're going to have a lot more after that. He's just getting started. I mean, you look at the guy, you see his rugged good looks, but he's also a great writer. He helped me write the script by doing all the work and letting me talk it. So, the dude knows how to write too. So, Pool Party Massacre, all these amazing horror things that you do, Drew, that had to start for you somewhere. So now, my friend, I would like to go back to the past and talk about what it was that got you started in the horror genre, your first horror movie. And Drew, the first horror movie you watched was
well, the first horror movie that I actually have a vivid memory of watching is Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part Two. My mom is a horror fan. My parents are movie buffs, so I'm sure there are like horror movies, classic horror movies that were on, throughout my childhood. But at a pretty early age, I want to say I was maybe 7 or 8
Mhm.
when I saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part Two, and it definitely changed it changed my life. I still remember it so vividly that it definitely has an impact. I was on a family reunion trip in Ohio. I lived in California. We went to Ohio for some family function. And back in those days, parents weren't as protective as they are now of their children. So the first day we got there, we were staying at like my Aunt Lottie's house, and her next door neighbor had boys similar to my age. So my mom made a point of like knocking on the door and saying, "Hey, my son is around the same age as your kids. Can he come over and play?" And that mom was like, "Sure, come on in." And I just got shoved into a stranger's house, two adults I'd never met, my mom had never met, you know, children ranging from like 16 down. And I was just shoved in there, and I ended up hanging out with them for the day. The mom piled us in a station wagon and took us to a video rental store, and each of her kids, like 3 or 4 kids, got to pick a movie. And the oldest picked Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. We picked whatever, I don't even remember. That shows how much of an impact Texas Chainsaw had on me. And so
Yes.
I think they had 3 kids. So we watched the 3 movies and ate pizza, like in sleeping bags on their living room floor. And I just remember getting the beginning of Texas when we finally made it to that movie last. The beginning opening scene on the bridge of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, terrifying me, like being frozen in fear, and then looking around the room and realizing everyone else was asleep. And so I was like in a stranger's house in a state I'd never even been to. I had no idea where I was, to be honest. Um, and watching this movie that was terrifying me, and I couldn't move. I didn't even know, I couldn't even go find my parents. It was the middle of the
Right.
night. So I just was stuck there watching this movie by myself in this strange setting, which has made it even more terrifying, of course, at that age. So it always like stuck with me forever. But then and not even at that point. I didn't go home and then say I want to watch more movies like this. It was years later, but it did stick with me in the way that it made me feel. And then years later, when I, at 12 or 13, when I started finding more horror movies and figuring out what that was, like I didn't even actually remember what it was called. Like I had no, if you had asked me a year or two after that, what movie I was describing as this crazy, like dead man with a chainsaw cuts this guy with weird glasses. Like I would try to describe it to people, and no one knew what I was. No one in my none of my peers knew what I was talking about. So when I finally found it, and then I like rekindled that, I watched it with new eyes as a young teenager, and then just loved it. And so there's kind of from there on.
Well, and yeah, back then we didn't have Google in our pocket that we could just try
No,
to figure out what the movie was that we had just seen.
no, not at all. And actually, later, I mean, again, like I was like 7 or 8, so I had no resources at all. But then later, 12, 13 and up, I would call my local video store. Like we had a place called Video Lake, and and this guy Kelly was the manager. He became still is a friend of mine to this day. But at that point in time, I would just call. I'd call Video Lake, and Kelly would answer, and I'd say, "Hey, Kelly, it's Drew Marvick. Do you know there's this movie where this guy they're in a truck and it's on a bridge and there's a chainsaw and there's like a radio lady?" And he would almost always know. He'd be like, "Yeah, of
Right.
course. Yeah, that's Texas Chainsaw Massacre." And then he'd like tell me who the actors' names and what year it came out and a bunch of useless facts. And so that was our Google, was Kelly at Video Lake, honestly.
That's
Uh,
that's amazing, man.
yeah, that's a great memory of calling him just. And then and that was when I was, like I said, pretty young. And then by the time I got to high school, I became friends with him.
Mhm.
And I guess you can't get arrested for it now. He would buy us beer. When we were like 15, Kelly would go to the grocery store and buy us beer. And then when we were graduating high school, we actually started hanging out with him. And, like I said, I'm still friends with him to this day. Like when I was 13, he was this old guy that worked at the video store. But then by the time I was 19, I was like, and 20, I was like, oh, he's only 24.
Right.
Like it seemed crazy when he was 18 and we were 13 or whatever, or 14. But
Hmm.
then all of a sudden when we were adults. But yeah, that was what we had. We had our local video store, or our
And
local
see,
video nerd.
I grew up in a video store. My mom and dad owned a mom and pop video store called Downtown Video in our town. So I was Kelly to a lot of people, with the movie
Yeah,
knowledge. So
I
I get
bet.
it, man. And it's amazing to hear other stories about people that went through these same things, and especially Texas Chainsaw 2. This is a movie that when it came out, especially wasn't as well received as the first one. So a lot of people kind of pushed this one under the radar. It's grown to have a big appreciation for it now.
Yeah.
But at first this did not get the big following that it does. So do you remember which scene it was that affected you the most when you had seen
I
it?
mean, it was definitely the bridge scene for sure. Like something about. I mean, it's the beginning of it too, but that's what stood out the most was
Mm-hmm.
that bridge scene when the truck pulls up next to him in reverse. Nubbins is on the. You think it's not. You have no idea what's going on. There's like a corpse with a chainsaw, and the guy had those glass. Everything about it was so surreal. Like even the glasses that he's wearing, like the holographic glasses,
Yeah.
like everything about it. I was like, just like thinking back on it, like my brain was like, there's a truck driving in reverse with like a corpse wielding a chainsaw and a guy with weird holographic eyes getting his head cut open while some lady screaming over the radio and listening to it. And I mean, it was just so much was going on. And it's funny to go visit. Like I've now been to that bridge several
Yeah.
times, and to see that it's only like 100 feet long. Yet the scene's like 10 minutes in high speeds. Um, but there's definitely that scene. I mean, all of it. And I know I've seen it so many times that it all blurs together. But that's the only scene that I can vividly remember being on that floor terrified, like clutching that sleeping bag. I might have even like covered my face for the rest of the movie, to be honest. Back then, I might have only made it that far and then just hid in a sleeping bag, listening to it because I couldn't even turn it off. It wasn't even at my house, so I just probably blocked the rest out as I like cowered inside a sleeping bag.
That's so awesome. But and again, it was terrifying then, but it's turned you into the horror person that you are now.
Yeah,
Your directorial debut was a slasher film.
yeah,
Like so to me, like my first horror movie was House from '86. So, horror comedies are kind of my jam. Like that's my thing, and
Yeah.
supernatural horror. And I think that all goes back to the first horror movie. And I think that really does plant that seed inside of us, and helps that to grow and become the horror fans we are as adults. Now, Texas Chainsaw itself is a huge franchise, a still expanding franchise, as a matter of fact. Since the second one was your first horror movie, I always ask, what is your favorite movie in the Texas Chainsaw franchise?
I mean, it's tough to not say part one just because it's such a classic. And I watched it pretty early on, not at 8 years old, but I was like a 14, 15-year old and then became a big fan and appreciated it. I've seen it so many times. And it's shaped the genre tremendously. So it's hard to not say, but I still would pick two. Like two is my personal favorite. In fact, like I made a couple years ago, I made a coffee mug that says Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 is better than Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And every now and then I'll break it out and take a picture in it just because it stirs the internet. So actually just posted it recently, and maybe it was like a week ago because I hadn't posted it in like a year, and it's definitely stirred a pot, and people, it started it's a hot take. A lot of people agree. I'm not saying it's a better movie either. I mean, the mug says it's better, but I'm not saying it's a better movie. I'm just saying I like it better.
Right.
And I do. But that's like you mentioned House. Like I love House, and House 2 are like some of my favorite movies ever. I tend to like sequels from that era at least a lot better because oftentimes Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a perfect example, and Slumber Party Massacre even. I love the originals, but then by the time the sequel came around, it's like they went off the rails. Like they'd built a foundation for Texas Chainsaw Massacre of this like really serious, terrifying movie, and then for some reason in part two they're like, well, we'll take the same characters, but now they are entering chili cook-offs. We're going to open with them in a chili cook-off, and you're like, what? And then like obviously Slumber Party Massacre 2 is completely off the rails. Like,
oh my God.
he's the ghost of the killer, but it's a different person, and now he has got a drill guitar and leather, and he dances.
The guitar is so sick, man.
Yeah, and we should have him sing. That's a great idea.
Take
so
it up
movies
a notch,
like that. But even House 2 compared to House.
Definitely.
They cranked up the like surreal and the comedy a ton.
Oh yeah. Even Grandpa, like all the things in House 2 that they did, they upped 1,000%. And I think you're right. Especially back then, it really was the whole part two's just got to be bigger, better, funnier, scarier, whatever we could do to make it a bigger movie. Let's do that. And
then part three, it would just like they'd give it to a whole new director, and who knows what would happen. That was like the formula. I was like, part one would be like great classic, would shape horror. Part two, well, let's just make it big and crazy. And then part three, I don't know, let's give it to this guy, and maybe who knows what'll happen.
Yeah, hope for the best.
Yeah, maybe it'll be in space.
So, back to Texas Chainsaw 2, because I always ask this question as well, because as horror fans, we love the kills. We live vicariously through the kills. Do you remember which kill it was from Texas Chainsaw 2 that was your favorite?
Oh, man. That's tough. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, it's funny thing about Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, like there aren't like really big, like show-stopping kill scenes. I mean, there's a really long, torturous kill scene that starts at the radio station and goes all the way to the cave and ends up with, face peeling and everything like that. But there isn't like a big, other than I guess the beginning with the splitting of the head. Yeah. Like there isn't like a big show-stopping death scene.
No, and that was the big thing about this movie too, was they really did take it more into the horror comedy than they did the horror. And I think that part of that was, Texas Chainsaw had some graphic kills, not like they do now, but for the time they were, hardcore. And Texas Chainsaw 2 kind of steered away from that a little bit. That was more quantity over quality, or quality over quantity with that one. Now, Texas Chainsaw 2, I know how much that means to you being your first horror movie. But here for a second, Drew, I do want to throw a little bit of a curveball at you. My little buddy Ghostface is here, and he has a question for you. What's your favorite scary movie, Drew? What is your favorite horror movie of all time?
So, little fun fact about me, I think I have some kind of a disorder. I don't know what it's called, where I can't pick a favorite of anything,
Okay.
except for person, and then that would be my girlfriend. But other than that, I can't. I have the hardest time. So if you could compile every single time I've answered this question, there would be several different, not a ton of like I don't, but there would probably be a handful of different answers. And Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 would be a lot of them. It would
Okay.
definitely be um it would be in the top of my list. I really like Return of the Living Dead too, just not the two, but oh I like Return of the Living
Also,
Dead
yeah.
part two. But the first one also kind of hit a spot for me when I was just at the right time. So for nostalgia, and it's a great movie, but for nostalgic reasons, like that's a movie that I watched over and over and over again because of the music and the characters and the effects and the comedy. There was so much about it that the rewatchability of Return of the Living Dead is so high that I would watch that constantly. Another movie, like for me, my favorites are always going to be things that I have an attachment to, like
Mhm.
through nostalgia. There isn't anything new that has bumped all of those. There's new movies that I love, but they'll never be able to beat like those movies that I just named, or even like offbeat movies like Shock 'em Dead is another one from when I was in high school. Like I loved my friends and I loved Shock 'em Dead. It's never gotten I don't think it's gotten the appreciation that I think it deserves. It does have a Blu-ray release,
Okay.
so that's good. But I mean, there are movies like that that I'll often reference, and then when it's not horror, I love to always just say my favorite movie is Princess Bride, um, which is definitely not horror, but it's a great movie, and it usually shocks people when they're expecting me to say like I don't know Serbian film or something like that, and
Yeah.
then I say Princess Bride. So
Well, and I don't know, man. To be in that fire swamp would be pretty fucking scary, dude.
yeah,
Like,
man, rodents
like,
of unusual size. What's
yes,
scarier than
man.
that? Uh,
I'm a huge sucker for that film too, man. Like, As You Wish. Like, there's just something about that movie that I think,
yeah,
especially for guys our age, that is just so special. Like, being young and watching that movie for the first time, like we felt like Fred Savage, when the grandpa was telling
yeah,
the story. And then the older you get and you fall in love and you find your person, and like it's just the perfect love story, man. It really is. And it's got action, adventure, horror. It's got a little bit of everything to it. Now the horror is tame. It's gateway horror stuff like Hocus
sure.
Pocus or Casper, but like I said, the
But
rodents of
it's
unusual size. When he's in there
yeah,
getting the thing and they, squeezing the life out of him and he's
yeah,
screaming in there, like definitely scenes as a kid where I was like, damn, that's kind of fucked up,
yeah.
So um I could wax poetic about Princess Bride all day, man. I think that movie's absolutely phenomenal. I can't tell you how many times my cousin Josh, who's like my brother, I grew up with him, for no reason, we would just be like, no more rhymes now. I mean it. Anybody want a peanut? Like it just
Oh, for
for
sure.
absolutely no reason whatsoever. And I cannot hear the word inconceivable without thinking of that film.
No,
So
it's inconceivable.
right. So man, again, I've had an amazing time talking about your first horror movie and your favorite horror movie. But before I let you go, we always bounce back to the same question. We're gonna go back to Texas Chainsaw 2, and what we're gonna do is rank this movie on a skull count. Now, we're not ranking it on acting, production, score, direction, nothing like that. We're not being
Okay.
critics. What we're doing here, Drew, is strictly ranking this movie on how much it affected you on your first viewing. So 0 skulls being not effective, 5 being extremely effective. You can use half and quarter skulls anywhere in the middle. Drew, what would your ranking of Texas Chainsaw 2 be?
I mean, I honestly think it would have to be a five, just because I can't explain how vividly I remember that night, and for it to be 30 some odd years ago and it have affected me so much, and to
Mm-hmm.
still remember it, and then for it to continue to shape um like how I watch movies, not meaning like in a sleeping bag on a stranger's floor, but like the type of movies that I watch and how I appreciate them. And because horror comedy definitely became my genre. I mean,
Yeah.
it's what I enjoy the most. I love other movies. I can watch The Thing over and over and over again. I mean, there are great movies that aren't horror comedies, but I'm always going to gravitate to horror comedy. It's just something in my blood. And even as a filmmaker, I don't think I could make a serious movie. Like I've had actually had people approach me with scripts and even with financing and ask me just to be a hired gun and direct their projects. And if they're serious, I can't even consider it because I don't know that I could. And
Right.
also, I mean, to be honest, I feel for me, in a way, it's even a crutch. Like I think for me, it's easier to make someone laugh than it is for me to genuinely scare someone. There might be some people. I have other friends, like my friend Brandon Christensen is a filmmaker who's made, I don't know, I think he's on his fifth movie now. All of them are genuinely creepy and scary on a level that I don't think I ever could achieve. It always amazes me. But I don't, because I don't think that I could do that. I don't have faith in myself to do that, but I'm pretty sure that I can make something stupid. That's like my strength. So, so in
Man,
a way, maybe I'm just falling back on it, or maybe I'm just using my strengths. But either way, it's where I land every time. I'm going to land on the absurd, and I'm going to land on horror comedy. And
but the world needs that, man. Like I said, like Brandon, I believe Brandon did Z, didn't he?
yes, yeah, yeah,
Fantastic
and
director,
stillborn,
fantastic
and
film. Um, I love Brandon. I had him on the show a couple years ago, and
oh,
the
nice.
minute I saw Z, I was like, I have to get this guy on. I have to learn. I have to get into his brain and see, how this. If you guys haven't seen Z as well, it's a Shudder original, worth a watch.
Yeah,
If
he's one
Imaginary
of
was a very good movie, that would be Z. Um,
he he's one of the most talented people I've ever met. I've known him for a really long time. Because he came up in he's Canadian, but when he moved to Las Vegas, was producing and directing commercials, and that's what I've been doing for 20 some odd years too. So I've worked with him over the years lots of times. Now not anymore because he's so busy making directing movies.
Right. And it's amazing to see the growth, and like you said, like he went the more serious, scary, frightening route. You went the more having fun, levity horror. And
Yeah,
huge desire and need for both of those types of films. There is no right or wrong when it comes to horror, in my opinion. There's films I like, there's films I dislike, but you could talk about the film I dislike the most, and I really hope there's an audience for it, even if it's not me. If somebody's creating art, I hope the saddest thing to me is art that goes unloved.
yeah.
Even if I'm not, people like The Exorcist too. I'll never understand it, but I'm glad that there's an audience for it, even though it's not my thing. Like I'm glad that there's people out there that respect that art and enjoy that art. So I know I said it at the beginning, guys, but we're at the end of the third act. The credits are about to roll and the curtain's about to drop. But before that happens, I want to remind you, I have all of Drew's social media links down in the description. So make sure you're following him and becoming a part of that family, as well as I have the links for Pool Party Massacre. So whether you're going to watch it on Tubi or Amazon Prime, if you haven't checked it out, go watch this film. You're going to love it. If you've already seen it, go watch it again because you're going to love it just as much this time. So, Drew, please don't go anywhere, my friend. I got a couple more questions for you. Everyone else, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. It really does help build the channel more than you know. And follow Sledgehammer Horror on social media. Our links are in the description as well. But until next time, keep talking horror, stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.